It will be the largest battle in the Western Hemisphere, pitting America's greatest military mind against America itself. For 3 days in July 1863, more lives will be lost than in any previous American war.
7,000 dead soldiers, 27,000 wounded, a tremendous slaughter.
It's the turning point of the Civil War.
It was the Second Revolution. It changed the very face of America.
And now, two enormous armies face off to determine the future of America at a place called Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg has reached its critical moment. 200 Confederate cannons pound the Union position. Now, General Robert E. Lee orders a second massive assault. Forward! 13,000 Confederate soldiers take the battlefield. It's a line over a mile long. If the rebels can whip the Yankees here, Washington, D.C. may be forced to concede two separate Americas. One slave, one free.
Fire!
Lee and his army have never been defeated. At 3:30, they hit the enemy line at full charge. The Union Army begins to flee. The Confederates seem assured of victory, as the future of America hangs in the balance. 2 years earlier, the rebellion was set in motion with the election of Abraham Lincoln.
When Lincoln was elected, South Carolina seceded because they believed that Lincoln would somehow interfere.
13 states would break away to form an independent country. The Confederate States of America. Lincoln orders the Union Army to end the rebellion. But they find themselves outmaneuvered in battle after battle by Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee is really one of the great generals in American history. He was thought so highly by both sides that he was offered generalship in both armies.
But Lee, a Virginian and unashamed slave owner, sided with the Confederacy.
Lee has defeated 5 Union commanders consecutively, and he smashed them. I increasingly believe Lee's the greatest general this country's ever produced. Whether you agree with his politics or not is irrelevant. As a battlefield commander, he's the best ever.
Now, in the summer of 1863, Lee makes his boldest move of all.
And there's General Lee!
He invades the North. Lee marches his army out of Virginia, up through Maryland, and into Pennsylvania. Their goal, to cut off America's capital and destroy America's will to fight.
What he wanted to do was not only defeat the Army of the Potomac, he wanted to destroy it. That meant kill or capture or scatter the individual soldiers. He was looking for a climactic battle that would win the war and end it.
Lee's Army of Northern Virginia consists of 75,000 men, still the largest military invasion of America in history. Lee's invasion has immediate consequences. The commanding general of the Union Army resigns. 2 other generals are offered the commander's position, but refuse in the face of fighting the undefeated Robert E. Lee. On June 27th, Lincoln sends an urgent message to the camp of an undistinguished career officer.
General Meade, sir. From the War Department in Washington. I'm afraid I have some troubling news, sir.
Military politics. Well, my conscience is clear. What are the charges?
Sir?
Colonel, am I being arrested?
No, sir. You're being made Commanding General of the Army of the Potomac.
The future of the Union was now in the hands of Major General George Gordon Meade.
He thought that he had probably had his death warrant written, professionally speaking. He was now going to have to take over command of this army, which was such a cockpit of politics.
George Gordon Meade was kind of a prickly subordinate. I mean, he's a tough leader, demanding, a really good fighter, but a tough man. He was called that damned goggle-eyed snapping turtle by some of those that served under him.
Now, with few options left, Lincoln places his hopes for saving the Union in the hands of this unassuming figure. One day after being made commanding general, Meade has his army on the march. 100,000 men on a collision course with the invading rebels. Frank Haskell is a 30-year-old lieutenant.
All the roads are converging up on this small town. Must be up over this hill.
Haskell quit his law practice in Wisconsin to fight for the Union. His personal letters to his brother are one of the best first-hand accounts of the battle.
My dear brother, we are marching against the enemy and the men are anxious. We hear frequently of the enemy's proximity. We hear that a great many roads converge and diverge at a town ahead. General Meade, therefore, has resolved to move toward this village.
The village, Gettysburg.
Gettysburg was the inevitable location for battle in the North. It was a network of road crossings. So anyone who was going to move from Virginia up into Pennsylvania would sooner or later have to come into the vicinity of Gettysburg.
The town of Gettysburg was a prosperous little town when the war came to it in July 1863. It included 2 small colleges, a Lutheran seminary, so it has an educational bent.
July 1st, 1863, just west of town. A small advance unit of Confederates wait for orders. John Moore is a 21-year-old farm boy from Tennessee. He writes a memoir of his first trip away from home.
Our division crossed the Potomac all in excellent condition. On the morning of July 1st, shortly after daybreak, we received an order to proceed to Gettysburg.
Get up, Moore. We going to town to get us some shoes.
Didn't we just send the cavalry through here? How come they didn't get us some shoes?
The Confederates don't really have any idea exactly where the Union Army is. In fact, they believe the Union Army is about 20 miles south of Gettysburg.
Union advance troops stumble upon Moore's unit. Within an hour, the skirmish turns into a full-scale battle as fresh units from both sides rush to the scene. General Lee is 8 miles away.
General Lee, General Ewell's engaged the enemy outside of Gettysburg.
My orders were not to engage the enemy. How large a force?
Not sure. No reports from the cavalry.
One of the problems for Robert E. Lee during the Gettysburg campaign is that he has a lack of cavalry eyes to his front. And that's because Jeb Stuart, his cavalry commander, has taken about half the cavalry corps on a wide eastward swinging move around the entire Union Army. He's destroying supplies, he's capturing prisoners, but he really isn't doing the reconnaissance job that Lee needs him to do.
Now, without intelligence from the cavalry, Lee finds himself in a battle he didn't plan. "30 miles to the south, Meade has also learned a battle is underway.
General Meade, sir. Do you want to fall back toward Washington?
The new commander faces a tough decision: retreat to a more defensible position or advance quickly to meet the rebel invasion head-on.
General, find good ground and hold it until the rest of the army arrives.
Yes, sir.
Meade does the one thing that no Union general has done yet. He stands up to Robert E. Lee. 20,000 Union troops march north to reinforce the embattled soldiers outside Gettysburg. At the same time, 3 divisions of Confederate infantry converge on the Pennsylvania crossroads. It is 1 p.m. The Battle of Gettysburg has begun. Just west of the Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg, Union forces are taking a brutal beating from fresh rebel reinforcements. Under Lieutenant General Richard Ewell.
More Confederate troops are coming in than the Union has coming in, and they're more powerful troops that drive off the Union forces who've been fighting there all day.
Confederate soldier Private John Moore writes about his first taste of combat.
The beginning of the battle was accidental, and the struggle was a fierce affair. But we never failed to drive the enemy when we raised a lusty rebel yell.
The skirmish is a triumph for the rebels.
Ewell's corps came in from the northwest and hit them in the side and blew the whole shebang through town.
Most of the retreating Union troops rushed through Gettysburg to a ridge just south of town with the ominous name, Cemetery Hill. Lieutenant Frank Haskell helps organize the Union defense on the ridge.
Go, boys, rally up behind these lines. Spread out!
As we came near the field, troops were coming in confusion through the town. The shattered regiments were reformed and faced toward the enemy once again. Troops were posted among the graves and monuments, which they used for shelter from the enemy's fire.
Union officers place the reinforcements all along the ridge. It begins at Big Round Top in the south, goes straight up and around Culp's Hill in the north. Nearly 3 miles long, it's the perfect defensive position.
Robert E. Lee first discovers that a full-scale battle is underway, probably about 1 o'clock or so, as he's riding up onto the battlefield on the 1st of July. It's not what he wanted. He wanted to wait until more forces had gathered in. But the battle is upon him now.
I don't like this ground.
Lee can already see that the enemy has a big tactical advantage. They hold the high ground. Lee also believes he's outnumbered, but these shortcomings have never kept Lee from winning every battle he's fought.
With Robert E. Lee, I think of a modern equivalent. I think of maybe George Patton, somebody who's very audacious, always on the offense.
Lee makes his first major tactical decision of the battle: take Culp's Hill, on the far north of the Union position.
Get our artillery up there, and they can rain destruction down on the enemy's flanks. Tell General Ewell to take that hill if practicable.
If practicable? There could be a couple of thousand Yankees on that damn hill.
If practicable. Well, what Lee meant in real terms was do it. Robert E. Lee was a Virginia gentleman. They do not scream at the top of their lungs, and they expect that their subordinates will understand them.
My men have been fighting like the devil all day.
Ewell decides that his forces are exhausted in the fight that's already happened, and so decides under those discretionary orders that it really wasn't possible right now. And there went a great opportunity for the Confederates to win this fight.
If on the first day Confederate troops had occupied Culp's Hill, those troops would have been in a position to attack the flank of troops who were on Cemetery Ridge.
Squeezed between the surrounding rebels, Meade's Union troops would be forced to retreat. Gettysburg would be a Confederate victory, likely forcing a truce with Washington, and the acceptance of two Americas. On such small things, like the words, "if practicable," hang the fates of nations. Despite the failure to take Culp's Hill, the Confederates were victorious on day one, and morale was high as the rebels made camp.
Hey, Culp, you're from around here, aren't you?
Yeah, I was born right here in Gettysburg.
Camping with the army beneath Culp's Hill is a young man also named Culp.
That hill there? It's called Culp's Hill, named after my uncle.
Wesley Culp joined the Confederate Army when he moved to Virginia. Now he is literally invading his own family's farm. But Wesley Culp never owned a slave, nor did many Confederate soldiers, despite the fact they were fighting to protect slavery.
Some of those Southerners fought to protect home. Some fought because they thought that it was the right thing and the manly thing to do. They could have cared less about slavery.
The planter aristocrats who were very wealthy and really controlled the South politically were able to get the poor whites to put on a uniform, pick up a gun, and go off and shoot and die to defend them.
Whatever reason one fought, every soldier had the same goal: fight to win. And no one was better at that than Robert E. Lee.
Lee's principal strength is morale, but he has another advantage in that he has the initiative. He can choose where he's going to strike and when he's going to strike next.
Gentlemen, much is at stake here. Today we've enjoyed a victory, but the enemy has a new commander.
General, if I may interrupt.
Lee's generals repeatedly suggest a more defensive approach to the battle.
Robert E. Lee was bold. He was audacious. His men worshipped him, and he could get them to do things that other generals couldn't get their men to do. And he began to believe that his men were invincible.
We don't need a tactical stalemate, nor do we need a technical victory. What we need is to destroy the Federal Army. The enemy is there. We will fight him there.
The die is cast. There will be no retreat from Gettysburg.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, there's a great head log coming up.
Union troops outside Gettysburg build breastworks of tree trunks and stone. They prepare to defend Culp's Hill, the northernmost end of the long Union line.
Both sides are going to be looking to, one, take that high ground, and the other, hold that high ground throughout this battle.
4,700 Confederate troops mass at the base of Culp's Hill. One of them is Wesley Culp. The rebels have a 3-to-1 advantage, but the Union holds the high ground. With the northern end of the Union line now under attack, General Lee initiates the next phase of the offensive. Attack the southernmost end of the Union line at the peak called Little Round Top. It's 2,000 rebels, against nearly as many Yankees, who again have the high ground. The Union holds the hill with a desperate bayonet charge.
Meade is the quintessential defensive commander who is using his interior lines, that is, his ability to move troops quickly a short distance, to offset the Confederate attacks as he sees them coming.
But Meade's troops take a pounding on both ends of the Union line. Brutal fighting lasts into the night at Culp's Hill. But as the last cannons fire, the Union still holds the high ground. The grim statistics of war mount by the second day of the battle. 14,000 Union casualties, 11,000 Confederates, dead, wounded, or captured. The surviving soldiers on both sides know a similar fate may await them tomorrow. Nothing has prepared Confederate John Moore or Union Lieutenant Frank Haskell for the carnage they have witnessed so far at Gettysburg.
Dear brother, you cannot understand the scene if you haven't witnessed it. Men drop dead on all sides.
War has never assumed a more hideous front. It seems as if demons were turned loose.
The fields were beautiful this morning. They are desolate now, covered with many thousands of dead men, some with upturned faces, some mutilated and frightful, bathed in blood.
But no imagination can adequately conceive of the magnitude of this duel. Our suspense is intense, for all seem to appreciate the danger of the impending carnage.
At the end of day 2, George Gordon Meade calls all of his commanders together, and they meet in a small room in this farmhouse and discuss the day's events.
Meade, who has only led the army for 5 days, does something no other Union general has ever done.
So we will put it to a vote. Each man here will give his opinion. Do we retreat, or do we stay and fight?
Military scholars have long argued over whether Meade's council of war was a stroke of genius or a sign of weakness.
This is the action of an insecure, poor leader. Meade was scared. He was scared the whole time.
Others believe Meade's democratic approach to strategy is not a sign of weakness, but a means of consensus building.
Meade was a solid leader, and those that worked under him were confident in his abilities. He's new to his command, though. He knows he's achieved at least a stalemate on this day, and he wants to get an assessment from his commanders about what maybe they should do as the battle continues.
The results are unanimous. Stay and fight. On the other side of Gettysburg, General Jeb Stuart's fabled cavalry finally arrives. 5,000 strong, the best horsemen in America, and the final piece of Lee's plan. Lee's next decision will determine life or death for 150,000 men and the destiny of a nation. 2 days of battle and 25,000 dead have not deterred either the Union or Confederate Army on the fields of Gettysburg. In the tent of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, a bold plan is taking shape.
Lee thinks he's winning the battle on the night of July 2nd. His army's morale is very high, and he believes that attacking again the next day will win him the victory.
We've licked the enemy 2 days running. I now believe that we can at last achieve total victory.
Lee's battle plan is based on classic military science.
Number one, he wanted Ewell's Corps to attack in the north. 10 Union troops down on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. Number two, he'd sent his cavalry corps on a wide sweeping attack to the Union rear under Jeb Stuart. And number three, the main part of his assault was against the Union center.
Lee's goal? Split the Union Army in two and continue his streak of never losing a battle.
Any questions, gentlemen?
No, sir.
Our plan begins at dawn.
Wesley Culp has spent the night at the base of the hill named after his family. He's one of the men who will put the first part of Lee's plan into action. Take Culp's Hill.
Culp, wake up. It's starting.
The Union artillery beats them to the punch. While the rebels try again to take Culp's Hill, Lee turns his attention to the center line, Cemetery Ridge.
Commence the cannonade.
"150 Confederate cannons open fire. The largest artillery barrage in the history of the Western Hemisphere. So loud, it's heard in Philadelphia, 150 miles away. Lee's goal: cause massive casualties in the Union ranks, softening up the enemy for a later infantry charge. But the rebel fire lands in the Union rear, where Lee expects the army to be waiting. He is wrong. George Meade has placed most of his troops up on the front lines, so the Confederate shells sail harmlessly over them. For all its sound and fury, the rebel cannonade has little effect. On Culp's Hill, the rebels still can't break the Union position.
And it is some of the bloodiest fighting of the entire Battle of Gettysburg. They never dent the Union line on Culp's Hill. And they sacrifice probably close to 2,000 men.
One of those sacrificed, Wesley Culp, who dies on the hill that bears his family's name.
To me, that attack is somewhat symbolic of the whole Confederate effort at Culp's Hill. Tremendous gallantry, great courage, but a fruitless sacrifice ultimately.
Lee believes he has landed the first blow in his three-part plan for victory. But the first blow on Culp's Hill has already missed. Unaware, he begins part two of his attack. Lee orders Jeb Stuart and his cavalry to go around Culp's Hill and strike the Union position from the rear. Over 4,000 rebel cavalrymen will try to cut the Union army in two. Scouting the far edge of the battlefield is a small unit of the Michigan Brigade, led by a newly minted Brigadier General, George Armstrong Custer. The 23-year-old Custer is the youngest general in the Union Army, and he is looking to make a name for himself.
Jeb Stuart. Yes, sir. Come on, you Wolverine!
Outnumbered by nearly 10 to 1, this tiny band is the only thing standing between Jeb Stuart and the unprotected Union rear. Close to 5,000 rebel horsemen are en route to attack the Union rear at Gettysburg. They're blocked by a tiny band of Union cavalry led by 23-year-old George Armstrong Custer.
Here come 400 men to attack 4,000, 5,000. Stuart is sure this is just a bluff. He'll pull off. But Custer digs in his spurs and they charge forward.
The Michigan cavalry hits the rebel column at full gallop.
They hit the front of the column, and it's like a railroad train. The front car stopped, and the cars behind it stopped too.
Other Union cavalry soon join the fight, and Jeb Stuart's bold rear attack is stopped dead. The frustrated rebels retreat. The second part of Lee's three-part plan has also failed. Now, Lee begins the final part of his plan, and it may still win the battle for the South. Lee orders fellow Virginian, Major General George E. Pickett, to lead a massive 13,000-man attack. The largest infantry attack in the history of the Western Hemisphere. It will be forever known as Pickett's Charge. The rebel line stretches for over a mile. Private John Moore has fought all 3 days at Gettysburg. Now, he finds himself in the center of this thin gray line, marching across a farmer's field.
In an instant, we reached the crest of the ridge, and we were then in full view of Cemetery Ridge. We obeyed the command to advance, and we could see the formidable line of artillery distant about 1,000 yards.
To the men on the Union side, like Frank Haskell, the sight is daunting.
Before us are 13,000 men, an overwhelming, resistless tide sweeping upon us. More than half a mile their front extends. They move in perfect order. Magnificent, grim, irresistible.
The rebels are aiming at one small point in the exact center of the thinly held Union line.
They don't march straight forward, but rather they focus in like a funnel because they wanted to break through the line. They didn't want to overwhelm it. To meet Stuart's cavalry and divide the Union force in half.
But Stuart's cavalry never makes it to the Union rear. The rebel cannonade doesn't dent the Union ranks. And Union Commander George Meade has anticipated Lee's next move.
At the meeting of his commanders, George Meade said, if Lee attacks, he's going to attack here. And he pointed to a map, and there's a little clump of trees in the middle of Cemetery Ridge. He was absolutely right. And consequently, Lee was basically going into the teeth of an enemy that was prepared to do battle.
Load! Canister! 250 yards! Fire! Independent fire! Fire at will!
Union artillery tearing great holes into the Confederate ranks, and so it's really doing great deadly damage.
The advancing rebels meet one major obstruction: a fence along the Emmitsburg Road. They are now within range of Union rifles. Despite 50% casualties, they still go forward.
But once they cross the Emmitsburg Road, if they dress their lines, and for those last several hundred meters, they actually execute a charge to break through that Union line.
Incredibly, the Confederate assault reaches the Union ranks. Union soldiers panic and flee as the rebels pour across the defenses. General Lee's audacious charge is poised to turn Gettysburg into the final victory for the Confederacy. Confederates break through the Union line. Yankees retreat in panic. Lieutenant Frank Haskell finds himself the only officer in the face of the fleeing Union infantry.
Turn them out and fire, or I will cut you down where you stand. Turn them out. Back to the line. Go on, boys. Get up there.
Haskell rallies the fleeing troops, while fresh reinforcements converge on the breakthrough point. The rebels now find themselves boxed in, taking fire from three sides.
Forward, boys. That's it. Pour fire into them.
The Confederates desperately await the salvation of Jeb Stuart's cavalry. But the cavalry never appears. And Pickett's charge becomes Pickett's retreat.
No one had yelled retreat. The whole thing just kind of broke apart under that combined fire all along the Union line.
My God. Look at him run.
General Pickett, prepare for a counterattack. Reform your division behind our lines.
General, I have no division.
It's all right, boys. Grab a rifle from the field and reform behind our lines.
As the men streamed back to the Confederate lines, they were met by their commander, Robert E. Lee, at the wood line, who took the blame upon himself.
This disaster was my fault, not yours. Now grab a rifle, I need you now.
Almost from the first, Lee had the initiative all the way through. The battle was his to lose.
In the single hour of Pickett's charge, over 6,000 Confederates were killed, wounded, or lost. Over the 3 days of the battle, the combined casualties from both sides, 50,000. The small village of Gettysburg is devastated. Buildings are burnt to the ground. Crops are destroyed. And the corpses of 10,000 men litter the streets and fields. For General George Meade, the Battle of Gettysburg was a stunning victory. But in Washington, Lincoln has concerns.
He thinks that Meade has an opportunity to crush Lee's army before it reaches the Potomac and crosses into safety in Virginia.
But Meade delays the attack. It's a lost opportunity for the North, but the tremendous casualties suffered by the Union Army may have made it impossible to realistically pursue the rebels. The survivors of Lee's shattered army make their way south to fight again another day. Among them, Private John Moore.
We presented a sad contrast in appearance and spirit in this retreat. Our brigade had begun the great battle of Gettysburg and fought in the last skirmish. We had suffered a terrible punishment.
They never came that far north again. After Gettysburg, morale plummeted. They went back south. They didn't get much to eat, and on and on.
Gettysburg would ultimately lead to the Confederate surrender nearly 2 years later. Lee's defeat at Gettysburg may be the single biggest reason there's just one American nation today.
The Civil War is a remembrance that, in fact, we are all in this democracy together. We are all Americans. The Civil War sealed that in blood.
2 days after the battle, Lieutenant Frank Haskell rode back to Cemetery Hill. Alone with the corpses and the memories, his words would later be echoed by Lincoln himself.
It seemed very strange upon approaching the Horseshoe Crest again, not to see it covered with thousands of troops. But they were all gone. The stillness and silence of death pervaded the locality. Hostilities should cease in death. These men of the rebellion are my brave, though deluded countrymen. These, my brethren of the fight, are with me, asleep. Their deeds have made this crest their resting place, hallowed ground.